I could do things at the ninth hour before the accident. I can't do that now. Learning to listen to your body, but it's also challenging because people expect you to show up the same way, but you've changed your life. It's been disrupted. You have to find a different way forward.
Welcome to the Habit of Possibility podcast, the show about turning obstacles into opportunities. I'm your host, Robbie Spier Miller. Today, we are sharing ideas for how to be resilient and avoid burnout in the face of unexpected changes and develop ways to harmonize with our new reality. Our guest, Sharon Summerfield, shares with us her story about how an injury disrupted her life, how she coped, and the gifts she discovered along the way. Sharon is the founder of the Nourished Executive and helps leaders invest in their well-being with the goal of preventing burnout and building a healthy lifestyle. Today, I'm really looking forward to this conversation with our guest. Her name is Sharon Summerfield, and she's had some very interesting shifts in her life that she's used to really benefit her future and become more connected with what she really wants. So I would like to just start having a conversation so she can share with you how that happened for her and any insights or wisdom she might have for you around facing challenges in your life. Welcome, Sharon.
Great to be here with you, Robbie. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Yeah. So why don't you start by sharing a little bit about, what sparked this? I know you made a big change in your life and you were facing some challenges. So, tell us about that. How did that start? What was that like for you so that we can see where you're coming from?
I'd be pleased to. So it's been an interesting journey. So for many years, actually several decades, I worked as an executive assistant and got involved in project management and managed a lot of events and conferences and meetings and worked with many, many very talented executives. And at one point I was working for a global engineering firm. And I had an organizational role, a project role, and I was leading a community investment initiative off the side of my desk. And I had a 3-hour commute. And it was at that point I really realized, for those in the project management space, they'll understand the the scope creep, where you take on, you're just going to do a little bit here and then it kind of goes a little bit further. Well, I came to this realization I had too much on my plate. And I had read this article by Brian Fraser, who used to have a company where he compared jazz to leadership. He's a leadership coach, but he's also a pastor. When my husband and I got married, he married us. But he had this newsletter, and in it talked about consider who you can best harmonize with. And this idea of work-life balance it never resonated with me. And so looking at who I could best harmonize with, I started looking at what I would say no to. And so that was the beginning of, because I was experiencing some symptoms of burnout, and I couldn't get a lot of answers to things. So it was by learning to say yes to myself that I could find those different ways forward. So when my project role came to an end, I was laid off from the organization I was with. And I'd always been looking at programs in holistic nutrition, not so much the food piece, because I had a really good handle on that, but I was really interested in their intersection with the body, mind, and spirit. And the piece of stress, because it doesn't matter how well you're eating. If you don't manage your stress in a different way, your body can't actually absorb all the nutrients. Like your body doesn't function as it's supposed to be. So I was out of work for 9 months and then joined Electronic Health Project, where I was going to school at the Canadian School of Nutrition at the same time, and was on that project till I finished my program. And while I was there, I actually got sick from air quality this is healthcare, in the project office. And it turned out it took months and months for them to figure out what was going on, and everyone was getting sick. That they'd actually installed the fans the wrong way. And there were some other issues. So I finished my nutrition program and then went to go work with a friend at the Canadian Cancer Society. And I wasn't working crazy hours. There was no expectation of crazy hours. We're having conversations about, caring about our people. Our people, are they able to work in their strength zones? Are they working too much? Are we seeing emails at 2 o'clock in the morning? And so I ended up doing coaching when I was there. I was asked to be a member of the health and safety committee. And then, sadly, we were leaving the lake. My husband's had a cabin at an off-grid lake here in BC, in Vancouver Island, for several decades. And I fell off his motorcycle and I injured my right side. That injury still plagues me. We're still trying to get diagnostics. So what I ended up doing is, first, after I had to go see my doctor, I had to actually get back on the motorcycle to go to emergency and then get back on the motorcycle to get back to Vancouver because we had to take a ferry to get home. And I ended up, I do not recommend this. I had to drive across a bridge to go see my doctor and didn't realize to the depths of the injury. We didn't realize at that point I'd fractured my ribs. We didn't understand about the soft tissue damage. So I saw her and she's like, you're not driving for 6 weeks and you're not using your hand for 6 weeks. Well, my driving actually was for 6 months. And I started working with my physio and I'm like, well, I want to get back to Pilates. She's like, we got to get you driving first. So then we introduced one-on-one Pilates, we introduced massage, we introduced lymphatic drainage, but everyone had to be willing to work with my physio, Clara, in Vancouver. Not everybody was. So if they weren't, they couldn't be part of what I call Project Me, and Clara being the project director of Project Me. So, we're going along building the team. I'm getting stronger. I mean, initially my arm was like this and my hand was in this ball. So all these different rehabs and, all the different exercises, all the different practitioners, they all had a different lens. And it was incredibly beautiful. They've all become dear friends. So, 4 years after that accident, I'm at the cabin again. I've had a huge level of anxiety because of the fall. So I was so scared of falling again. And I've been cleaning up arbutus leaves because arbutus trees are beautiful. I don't know if you have them in Ontario, but we have them in...
I've never heard of them, so...
Oh, they're stunning. But there's a problem with them. Their leaves don't break down as quickly as other leaves do. And so they'll layer on top of each other. So I was really afraid someone was going to fall. And my parents, who were in their 80s, were coming to the cabin. I had a couple of sisters. And some other friends were coming for a visit. So I've been cleaning them up for weeks. So the day after my 60th birthday, I went to climb up this little hill. We have a little lending library, those little community libraries, which I think are just beautiful.
Like the ones where you open the little apartment and we have one in our neighborhood.
Yeah, I love them. So I'd taken a couple of books and I wanted to put some more books in there. So I went up this little hill and I started to slip. And then I fell and ended up having to get rushed first to Courtney Hospital and then Campbell River Hospital for an emergency hip replacement. And so it was, I'm not starting from square one. I've got my rehab team for my right side. Now I need to build a rehab team for my left. It was beautiful that, I could get some of the same people involved. But a month after my accident, my beautiful physio in Vancouver, Clara, actually was hit by a car riding her bike in the bike lane by Vancouver Airport.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so she's still, it's injury isn't easy, but sometimes it's by sharing our stories and sharing what we learn along the way that we actually inspire others. And one of the things Clara had me do was I had to learn to type again. I had exercises like I'm going to write a card a day. I'm going to wear pants with a zipper once a week. So it's all those. And so one of her exercises was to take a recipe, make it more nutrient dense using different tools in the kitchen, because I couldn't, one thing was, it took me 6 months to chop a cucumber. And you think about, cucumber is not very dense. And so that became an exercise. That became something. I started making all these different recipes, but using fundamentally different tools. So actually next weekend, I'm doing a workshop on navigating the holidays with food sensitivities. And I'm going to feature a number of the recipes that I've created.
Ah, great. Well, you're speaking my language because I'm a foodie. So
oh, that's great.
all into
it's
that.
great.
Yeah.
And so like everything has become like a rehab exercise. Like sending an email is a rehab exercise for my team that I work with. My grandma used to make these wreaths that were made out of candies. So that's a rehab exercise. I can't do like 3 or 4 in a day. I might be able to do one because I'm tying each little, and I don't use the Kerr candies that grandma used. We're going to have something on that. Let's have truffles. So, and they all look forward to it each year. Actually, it's quite funny. Actually, they're like, oh, do we get another wreath? So it's those little things. And I started, of course, reading a lot more, and was introduced to the work of so many beautiful people. And I remember I discovered Marcus Buckingham's work about 15 years ago, when I read, I can't remember which book it was, and he ended up doing this podcast with Whitney Johnson, and then I just started discovering Whitney's work, and her podcast, Disrupt Yourself, became like this oxygen of hope for me. And I was introduced to all these amazing authors and thought leaders. And then after I broke my hip, her team started reaching out to me and invited me to do their Smart Growth certification. And part of that is looking at your growth accelerants, which I've been living for 4 years. How can I step back to grow? How can I embrace my constraints? And so it was just like it was speaking my language.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So you really had your life thrown up in the air because the way you were living before, you couldn't keep living. And nature was forcing you to do what you needed to do to recover or adapt your life. And so it must have been a big growing experience for you as a person that had some really great things. And it sounds like you discovered a lot of wonderful things and added things to your life. And it probably had some really challenging things. Would you say that?
Yeah, it did.
That's true. Yeah.
It did. And recently I've written 3 articles with Shavisa Horseman. I met her on LinkedIn, and about recovery, about the role of Pilates in osteopath, about that being vulnerable and, sitting with what's going on. And it was really hard for me to lose my identity as an executive assistant. I had a plan. I was finally working in an organization with a friend. We were, really finding those ways to lift and empower people. I remember when I was there was someone I learned that she'd come back, she'd had day surgery and came back to the office because there was no one to fill in. And at that point, the organization had volunteers on reception. And I remember going to Erin saying, we've got to do something. We need to do something. Maybe we can be creative. Maybe, we're talking about, lots of times there's lots of really ways we can be creative. It doesn't have to be a full-time role. Maybe you create part-time roles. Maybe you bring in working moms. Maybe you attract people that want to get into fundraising or different areas of the business. And I remember it was about 6 or 8 months after the injury, and we would get together for tea. Because we were friends long before I went to go work with her. And she's like, Sharon, it's been approved that we're going to create a full-time role. We're going to be creative. We're going to do something. And it's those sorts of things. So I've had a number of those conversations with the injury, because, I did work as an admin professional for so many years. So my lens on a lot of things is really different. And I've really learned about and held on to that strong planning tool. For me, it becomes, I can do things I could do things at the 9th hour before the accident. I can't do that now. And so it's like really listening and learning to listen to your body, but it's also challenging because people expect you to show up the same way. But you've changed because your life, it's been disrupted, and you have to find a different way forward.
For sure. Yeah. And so it's so interesting because we have a lot of people who come for hypnosis training, and some of them are coming for things like, let's say, weight loss, where just about every weight loss client, they want to have lost the weight like yesterday. Right, which you can understand, but a lot of the developing that lifestyle that can support long-term health and fitness is about being willing to stay with things over time and to practice just the way you practice to your rehab, to practice living the way you need to live to be healthy and fit. Or we have people who are business owners or who want to build a business and they want it done like now, or they want every little thing they do to work beautifully. And a lot of it is trial and error and the willingness to stay with that and keep focused on the vision and be creative and be flexible enough to do what it takes to get the outcome. So for you, you had this big picture outcome of rebuilding your life and finding a way to navigate life in a way that's satisfying and that you can contribute and that works for your body. And I think many people have, different versions of this, whether they're having a physical challenge or an emotional challenge or a financial or business challenge or learning growth challenge, that it's a really great real life example of how nature holds us accountable to change in human time and to grow ourselves in a way that nature allows. And so I think a big skill or a big muscle we build here with hypnosis is helping people learn how to do that. And for you, Sharon, because you didn't have a choice, physically, you didn't have a choice, you had to do it. I'm sure you can see examples in your life before this happened where you did have a choice and maybe something needed to change, but you were relying on your old way of doing things or what your personal preferences were instead of doing what works better. Can you think of some examples of where you might have done that?
I think for a long time, it was always, it needs to be done, so therefore it will be. And that was something I really, really learned, after I was laid off from the engineering firm. I was used to making things happen. I'd been working with big teams, and it was actually amazing what we made happen. And then I went to go work on an electronic health project. And, going from construction and engineering to healthcare, I'd worked on big projects before. Healthcare is having a hard time. And I was used to teams that were used to working together. Like when the last big project I worked on was the South Fraser Perimeter Road. So it's kind of like the size of Metrolinx in Ontario. And then when I went to go work on an electronic health project, which was around a little smaller. But in engineering construction, we were used to working like that. When you talk about, building teams, the storming stage on the engineering construction projects I was part of, storming stage didn't last very long. We went from storming to norming and performing really quickly. Mm-hmm. When I was on the healthcare project for 3 years, we never got out of storming. And so and one of the things I had to really learn was that I can't make things happen at all costs, because sometimes there's a reason why things aren't working. And that was one thing I actually learned in the engineering firm is, as an executive assistant, at one point I was working with 2 senior leaders, one with global responsibilities and one with national responsibilities across Canada. And, I learned to watch the emails kind of do the flurry, wait them to slow down, and then, could take the action that was needed. But it was, everyone's like, we just noticed that you just kind of, you don't react. You just wait. Well, healthcare, everything is a reaction. And I had to learn that I couldn't make things happen at all costs. And and I had to learn to celebrate that I have done the best job I could with the tools and resources I had available. And so we actually started this conversation because there was a huge problem with IT support. And we started this conversation of actually documenting when support requests were put in, things that needed to be done. And some of these tickets were never resolved. And I remember in the middle of this, I just thought, I just have to send the IT people that I worked with when I was at the engineering firm and on the project. I sent it to all three of them. And I'm like, I always thought you guys were great, but I think you walk on water now. And what was interesting is going through that process of the documentation, other people got involved. And the director of communications said, you guys have been doing this for a long time. I'm getting other people involved. Well, it turned out we didn't have the infrastructure that we needed to do what was being asked of us. We just didn't have, and they needed to do some upgrading and all this other kind of stuff. But it was a really good lesson to learn for me to continue to learn that lesson is sometimes we need to celebrate that sometimes doing the best we can is all we can do. I'm not talking about dropping the ball. I'm not talking about doing the bare minimum. I'm talking about performing, but learning that this is all I can do right now. We've exhausted all the possibilities. Like with my injury, it was when I started Pilates, she had to put her hand underneath my shoulder blade to lift it up into position so I could actually do some of the exercises to get those stabilizing muscles starting to learn to do their job again. And it really was learning to learn again. And I think those lessons are really important. I think we need to pay attention to them.
Yeah. And I think that the big, really valuable message of sharing here is that when you were working at that engineering firm, you were on these teams and they functioned well and you were used to making things happen. And you started when you had these other experiences, whether it was with the injury or working with that other team, where you realized, wow, I'm in a situation where I don't have that kind of control. Yeah. And so you discovered what it means to know you're okay anyway and do what you can do and learn from that and be creative with that. And sometimes people find it really crushes their spirit when they're in those kinds of situations. And it can. Yeah. So you found a way to make it meaningful and valuable anyway. And I think some of this is also if we stand back and see the picture in a bigger and bigger fashion, then we can see there's always a bigger game being played than the one we think is being played. So it's easier to value other things than maybe what's immediately in front of us. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's, over the last 6 years have not been easy. And I remember a year after the accident, like I figured I'd be maybe off work for a week or two. And when the first one was 6 weeks, and then, my hand ballooned for 3 years. And I remember a year after the accident, having a conversation with my doctor. She's like, you will never be able to go back to do the work that you did before. Mm-hmm. And, over the last 6 years, I've taken on volunteer roles. One was on a council with the strata at the lake, and another one was with the Board of Trade, mimic some of those things that I used to do. And I've had to resign in both cases because I physically can't do it. And I think it's really a big continual learning is just because I know how to do something doesn't mean I need to be the person that does it. And I need to listen to my body because, if I'm working on a women's health conference and I just do little bits each day. If I do too much, when I need to take a break, I'm not taking a break for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm taking a break for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
And I think that piece is so important. And the work that you do with the hypnosis, like that is so incredibly important. And one of the things I discovered, I think it was 2 years after the accident, I'd been using breath work during my help manage pain. I had done a meditation class, a transcendental meditation class in Vancouver, and that about 3 months before the accident happened. So I would actually use meditation to deal with the pain. I would use it, and then I learned a little bit more about breath work. And then I actually did a 5-day breathwork course through Yoga Body. And it was so incredibly powerful to learn more about those tools I was already using, but understand them a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because we don't necessarily, and that's why I ran into a bit of, wasn't on the same page with my doctor, because she was always trying to prescribe medications like painkillers. I'm like, well, me and Tylenol 3 don't get along very well. So I found topical creams that had arnica and a natural pain reliever in it. And, used topical castor oil, breath work, meditation, ice. Ice is my friend, cold water, but all those sorts of things instead of, if I take if I take a painkiller, I'm going to deal with more problems from taking that. So I found these other options, and what you do must be so beneficial to your clients.
Yeah. Well, all of this whole conversation is reminding me of a lot of athletes I've worked with. And there are times when I have athletes who come for help with hypnosis and they initially come for sports performance because they're hitting a wall. Maybe they've lost their confidence because, something didn't go well in a certain situation, or they had an injury or something. And so they're usually coming to learn how to get in their zone as an athlete, which hypnosis is wonderful for. And often what is going on beneath all that is that they've attached their sense of self-worth to their performance. I've worked with athletes who've gotten full scholarships to U.S. colleges, which are worth, $50,000 or $80,000 a year. And the minute they get an injury, they're off the team and they lose the scholarship. And if they're not from the U.S., they have to leave the country. So I've worked with athletes who are in that situation, and it can really wreck their sense of self-worth, because if they're that high performing, their whole life has been about the sport and excelling, and they can't anymore, right? They have the injury changes what they can do. And I think it's a really good example of how, in a way, we're all athletes. We all have certain talents or things that we rely on to prop ourselves up. And the more we can free ourselves from that, the better things go. And the more we're freed up to have choices and see the big picture of life and respond in a way that's wiser and more in sync with ourselves.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And that's really the message I'm getting from you, is that it's, with hypnosis, we can talk about this, but when you communicate subconsciously, the subconscious mind can discover new choices that rationally we can understand them, but we don't really know what that means. And so I think there are a lot of people who can benefit from the maturity and the skills you got from these experiences without necessarily having to have the experiences, right? Like,
don't encourage that.
Right.
We don't encourage that.
We don't want to have an accident to discover these things. So, I'm hoping that some people who are listening can learn through osmosis, from these examples, so that, and if you do need help and feedback to truly discover what it means to know you're okay, even if whatever your talents or skills or the things that you've been relying on fall apart, that you can still know you're okay. And it's a thing that we need to experience. We can't, just talking about it isn't going to do it. So I do a lot of work like that with the clients and the students who come here. So, there's a lot of dovetailing of your experiences
yeah.
with people have here. You can connect with Sharon Summerfield at www.nourishedexecutive.ca. Let us know what you think of the show. Reach out to us at mindlinkconsulting.com. And if you like this show, please rate and review us so other people can find us too. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Robbie Spier Miller, the host of the Habit of Possibility podcast. Tune in next time to learn more about how you can turn obstacles into opportunities and make the most of your life and career. And if you're interested in connecting with me and learning about personal and business coaching, consulting, and training opportunities, go to mindlinkconsulting.com or hypnosistrainingcanada.com and schedule your free consultation.